Joining us now is our great friend on the show, Ralph Schoellhammer from Europe. Ralph, extraordinary tweet you put out on the weekend. We had to get you on to tell us all about it. It appears that Germany has just put climate neutrality by 2045, i.e. net zero nonsense, into its constitution. Is this, and this is a so-called conservative government, Ralph, is this true?
Well, it is true, and I remember we talked on your show about the German elections, and I remember quite distinctly that the argument was that the conservatives in Germany are not real conservatives. Yeah. And this is precisely what's happening now. Mr. Merz made two promises. No new debt and the end of green madness will be kind of the signature features of his new administration. The election was barely a week over, and he backpedaled on both of those. It's very frustrating. But to be quite honest, everybody who had two senses in their head knew that this was going to happen.
Rita.
Well, you've got the Germans overwhelmingly voting for centre-right parties. This supposed Conservative Party got the most votes. The AfD were second, a few percentage points below them. And yet they did not form a coalition with the AfD. They formed a coalition with other smaller parties. Explain how that process has worked and what a betrayal this is of what the German population actually voted for.
Well, it wasn't that overwhelming, right? The Conservatives got 28% of the vote, and that was the worst result in history. They only had one result that was even worse. That was 4 years before that. And the AfD, it is true, they doubled from 10 to 20%, but 20% and 28% is 48%. So even if they would have entered into a coalition, they would have had a majority in parliament. But it would have been a stretch to say that the overwhelming majority of the German people supported the center-right government. They supported slightly more than the alternatives. But the problem is the Germans, for historical reasons, they are still shying away when it comes to voting for right-wing parties. And now they're paying a price, because if you don't allow the right to come to power, the left will stay in power. So now the Greens or the Social Democrats, the Social Democrats will be part of the next government, the Greens will not be, but all their policy preferences have now entered the coalition negotiations and they will be executed. So sure, there no longer is Robert Habeck, the disastrous Green Minister of the Economy, but many of his policies will continue with the future government.
And Ralph, I've heard that now under this government, this supposedly center-right government, the biggest issue, migration, well, they've swept that under the carpet. Apparently, Afghan migrants are being brought back in again to Germany. And more broadly, what is the future for democracy in Europe when the will of the people, when it comes to voting for parties like AfD or candidates like the one who was barred from running in Romania, are simply shut out by the establishment, officially or unofficially, because, well, the people just have got it wrong and they're only going to be allowed to vote when they get it right?
Yeah. Well, the main reason is, and please forgive my French, is that most European conservative parties are idiots. Because what they're doing is they say we will never enter a coalition with the quote-unquote far right, meaning they enter into negotiations with center-left parties and saying we have no alternative to you. So Friedrich Merz says, I'm not going to do something with the AfD. So then, of course, the Social Democrats say, well, if we are your only option, we're going to dictate to you what we want. And this is exactly what they're doing. You see the same thing happening in the Netherlands, right, where they refused to make Geert Wilders the prime minister. You saw the same thing happening in Austria, where the right-wing party became the strongest party after the elections, and now you have three smaller parties forming a government. And what happened in Romania, I have to admit, is the most shocking of all the developments. I mean, you have a candidate who wins the first round of the presidential elections, the elections get annulled. Now in the polls, he's riding high with 44%, so he's leading the polls. Now he's banned from running. And the interesting part here is they come up now with all these reasons. He's a fascist, he's an anti-Semite, and so on and so on. And let's stipulate that all of that is true. Well, then that was known in December when the first round of the elections took place. So why was it not a problem in December, and why is it a problem now? And it reminds one of the saying by Stalin's head of the secret police, who once said to Stalin, show me the man, I show you the crime. And this is what's happening in Romania. And this seems to be a little bit of a dry run. If you can't beat them at the elections, you drag them into court and you ban them from running for office. A very, very worrisome development.
Now, we've seen the Trump administration cajole the Europeans into spending more for their own defence. How is that project progressing? We've seen them say, yes, we're going to form a coalition and we're going to step in and help Ukraine, even though Ukraine's now agreed to this peace deal. What's the mood like in Europe with the US really pivoting away from what has traditionally been their role?
Well, in general, I think what the United States is doing to Europe is not a bad thing. The idea that the Europeans have to stand on their own feet is something that's good for Europe, and that on the long run is also good for the US. However, the issue is, and there we can connect the dots from the new rearmaments program and green policies, if you hollow out your industrial base, all the money in the world is not going to afford you any weapons, because it's not about coins and bills and euros. It's about turning these coins and bills and euros into guns, tanks, and cannons. But if you no longer have the industry, if you don't have access to the resources, there is not much you can do. So in the worst case, this is turning into inflation, because now armaments companies have to compete with the private sector, the civilian sector for resources, or that money is going to the United States, because they have the military-industrial complex, or as it happened right after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, all of this is just talk and nothing is going to happen. So those are the options. About the Trump administration, I'm sympathetic to Donald Trump. If you say, guys, you have to do more, very good. I think the way in which he's saying it, and I'm actually more thinking about the Canadians than the Europeans, I think that could be improved, because there is a tendency now in Europe, less so, but particularly in Canada, that in a kind of knee-jerk reaction, people now start to vote for left-wing parties because they feel that their domestic right-wing party likes Trump. And if Trump speaks bad about their country, they kind of automatically then swivel to the left-wing party. This is what you see in Canada. I mean, the Liberal Party of Justin Trudeau is doing way, way, way too good, only because of the things that Trump has been saying about Canada.
Absolutely. Ralf Schoellhammer, always great to chat to you. Head of the Centre of History there in Europe. And you can follow Ralf on Twitter. He's fantastic. Thanks so much, Ralf. Always great to chat to you. Thanks for staying up again to chat to us here on Outsiders.